For 24 years, she silenced attorneys and destroyed lives, until one man flipped the script and had her arrested in her own courtroom. The air inside the Jefferson County Courthouse in Birmingham, Alabama, felt thick, not from the humidity outside, but from something heavier. An unspoken truth had settled into the walls over decades. Everyone who walked through those heavy oak doors knew how things worked in Judge Meredith Langford's courtroom. She was the kind of judge who rarely looked over her reading glasses, her sharp eyes cutting through attorneys like they were nothing more than irritations. She spoke in a measured tone, never raising her voice, but the authority in it crushed anyone who dared push back. Dear friends, enjoy this relaxing moment. Take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Langford had been on the bench for 24 years, long enough to leave a legacy. Not the kind carved into plaques or celebrated in law schools, but the kind whispered about in hallways, discussed in hushed tones at bar association meetings. Attorneys, especially black attorneys, knew exactly what they were up against when their case landed in her courtroom. The rulings always seemed to lean one way. The objections she sustained or overruled followed a pattern no one could prove, but everyone understood. Today, that pattern was about to be tested. Darnell Hayes stepped into the courtroom, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He had been here before, but today was different. He wasn't just another defense attorney standing before Judge Langford. He wasn't just another name on the docket. Today, he had something she didn't see coming. Darnell was 48 years old, a man who had built his career on taking the cases no one wanted. His reputation stretched far beyond Alabama, and his ability to tear apart a prosecution's case made him a target for people like Langford. But that never stopped him. What did stop him, just for a second, was the look in her eyes when he walked toward the defense table. She already hated him, not because of the case, not because of anything he had said, but because he was him. Darnell felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about his client, Tyrone Wills, a man falsely accused of armed robbery. This wasn't just about proving innocence. This was about something much bigger, and he wasn't leaving this courtroom without making that clear. Mr. Hayes, Judge Langford said, barely acknowledging him as she scanned the paperwork in front of her, you're already on thin ice in my courtroom. Don't waste my time today. There was no reason for her to say that, they hadn't even started. Darnell tightened his grip on his briefcase but kept his expression unreadable. I'll try not to, Your Honor, he said. Judge Langford smirked. Good, because I have a full docket, and I don't need theatrics. She turned to the prosecution, an ego-driven young assistant district attorney named Philip Calloway, fresh out of law school, trying too hard to impress the wrong people. The state is ready, Your Honor, Calloway said, casting a smug glance in Darnell's direction. Of course they were ready. They were always ready when the case was stacked against a black man. Darnell's client sat beside him, hands folded, shoulders hunched forward, the kind of posture that belonged to someone who had been in the system too long. He had seen too much, heard too much, lost too much. Darnell leaned in slightly. We're ready too, he said, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. Judge Langford exhaled through her nose. Let's get this over with. The trial began, but it wasn't a trial. It was a performance, and Judge Langford had the starring role. Every objection Darnell raised was dismissed with barely a thought. Every time Calloway stumbled over a legal argument, she guided him like a teacher correcting a favorite student. The jury noticed. The gallery noticed. But no one was brave enough to say anything, except Darnell. He studied her, the way her lips curled when he spoke, the way she barely concealed her contempt. It wasn't just bias, it was something worse, something he had spent years preparing for. But the courtroom didn't know that yet. Darnell had been in hostile courtrooms before, but this was different. Judge Langford wasn't even trying to hide it. Every time he spoke, she cut him off. Every time he raised a valid argument, she waved it away like a fly buzzing near her ear. The courtroom had its own rhythm, lawyers spoke, judges ruled, the jury listened. But in this courtroom, Langford had decided the verdict before the trial even began. Darnell caught the jury's discomfort in the way they shifted in their seats. Even some of the white jurors, who might have come in with their own preconceived notions, couldn't ignore what was happening. But Judge Langford didn't care. She doubled down, her words sharper each time she addressed him. "Mr. Hayes, you're testing my patience. Mr. Hayes, if you raise one more baseless objection, I'll hold you in contempt. Mr. Hayes, this is not a lecture hall. If you want to grandstand, do it somewhere else." Darnell kept his expression calm, but inside, his blood was boiling. Not because she was insulting him, he could handle that, but because she was making it personal. And that was a mistake. Still, he needed her to keep talking, to keep exposing herself. "Your Honor," he said, his voice measured, "the prosecution just introduced evidence that was not disclosed in discovery. That's a clear violation of Brady v. Maryland. I move for an immediate mistrial." Judge Langford leaned back in her chair, adjusting her glasses with exaggerated boredom. "Denied." Darnell blinked, not out of surprise, but out of strategy. He let a beat of silence hang in the air before speaking again. "To be clear, Your Honor, you're refusing to acknowledge a Brady violation?" Langford's lips pressed together. "I said denied, Mr. Hayes." He could feel the courtroom shifting, the reporter scribbling faster, the whispers in the gallery growing louder. She saw it too, her eyes darkening. And for the first time, she looked directly at him. "You are dangerously close to being held in contempt, Mr. Hayes." Darnell tilted his head slightly. "For what, Your Honor?" "Asking the court to follow the law." Langford slammed her gavel so hard that the sound echoed against the high ceilings. "That's enough," she snapped. "One more word, and I'll have you removed." The room was dead silent. Darnell could hear his own heartbeat, but he wasn't nervous. This was exactly what he needed. His client, Tyrone Wills, clenched his fists under the table. "Man, don't let her do this to you," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Darnell didn't even glance over. "I have nothing further, Your Honor," he said smoothly, taking his seat. Langford scoffed, acting as if she had won. But what she didn't realize was that the game had just begun, and she had played right into his hands. Darnell sat still, his expression unreadable. He knew when to push and when to pull back, just enough to let someone destroy themselves. And Judge Langford was doing just that. The jury exchanged looks, some glancing at the gallery where reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. Everyone could feel it now, the shift, the discomfort, the raw exposure of a judge who had grown too comfortable in her own power. But Langford wasn't backing down. She sat straighter in her chair, her voice cold. "Mr. Calloway, continue with your questioning." Philip Calloway cleared his throat, clearly rattled. He was young, but he wasn't stupid. He saw what was happening too. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, turning to the witness stand where a shaky-eyed store clerk Saturday, "Mr. Thomas, can you confirm that the defendant, Tyrone Wills, was the man you saw at the scene of the robbery?" The old man hesitated. Darnell leaned forward slightly, watching. He'd seen this kind of hesitation before, the kind that meant someone wasn't as sure as they had been coached to be. Judge Langford wasn't interested in hesitation. "Answer the question," she pressed. The witness flinched. I think so," he said finally. Darnell stood up immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. That is not a definitive statement." Langford didn't even hesitate. Overruled. Darnell exhaled slowly, shaking his head just slightly. just enough for the jury to notice. He let Calloway fumble through a few more questions before standing up for the cross-examination. Darnell approached the witness stand, his voice steady. "Mr. Thomas, you said you think you saw my client that night. How sure are you?" The man licked his lips. "I mean, I thought I saw him, but, you're not certain?" Darnell asked. Langford cut in before the witness could answer. "Move on, Mr. Hayes." Darnell turned his head slowly, meeting the judge's eyes. This was too blatant, too obvious. "I'd like the witness to answer, Your Honor." "I said move on," Langford repeated, her voice sharp. Darnell didn't blink. "For the record, Your Honor, you are preventing the witness from clarifying his own statement." Langford's face twitched. "I'm warning you, Mr. Hayes." Darnell smiled, just slightly. "I understand, Your Honor." He turned back to the witness. No further questions. He walked back to the defense table, slow and deliberate. He could feel the tension in the room shifting again, twisting, tightening. Langford knew she had lost control of the room, and Darnell knew it was time. He wasn't here just to win this case. He was here to end her. He reached into his briefcase, his fingers brushing against the stack of documents that would change everything. And just as he did, the courtroom doors swung open. Something was about to happen that Judge Langford never saw coming. The heavy double doors of the courtroom swung open, and the sound alone was enough to shift every pair of eyes away from the witness stand. Two federal agents in dark suits strode in, their movements crisp, purposeful. The courtroom went still, a silence so deep it swallowed the air itself. Darnell didn't react. He simply smoothed out his tie and folded his hands neatly on the defense table. Judge Langford's eyes flickered with confusion, then irritation. "What is the meaning of this?" One of the agents, a tall man with a clipped demeanor, flashed a badge as he spoke. "Judge Meredith Langford, we need to speak with you immediately." Langford's jaw tightened. "I am in the middle of a trial." The agent didn't budge. "It's urgent." Darnell could see the confusion morph into something dangerously close to fear in her expression, just a flicker of it, quickly buried under a mask of judicial arrogance. She squared her shoulders. "This is highly inappropriate. Whatever this is, it will have to wait until I've concluded these proceedings." The other agent stepped forward, this time addressing the courtroom at large. "This is a matter of federal interest. It cannot wait." A ripple of whispers spread through the gallery. Even the jury, sworn to impartiality, couldn't hide their curiosity. Philip Calloway, the prosecutor, cleared his throat awkwardly. Should we take a recess, Your Honor?" Langford's fingers curled into the bench. "No," her voice was sharp, too sharp. "We are not taking a recess. The defense has wasted enough of this court's time, and I refuse to allow." The first agent interrupted. "We have a warrant for your arrest." A collective gasp rippled through the room. For the first time in 24 years, Judge Langford lost control of her courtroom. Darnell let the moment breathe, let the weight of it sink into every corner of the room. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stood. He turned, looking at the jury, the gallery, the reporter scribbling frantically, then finally, he faced her. And he spoke. "Your Honor," he said, "I believe you just denied my motion for a mistrial. But it seems this trial is now the least of your concerns." Judge Langford's face drained of color. The lead agent stepped forward, pulling a folded sheet of paper from his jacket. "Meredith Langford, you are being arrested under suspicion of bribery, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights under federal law." The room exploded. The gallery erupted in voices, some shocked, some delighted, some stunned into silence. The jury members sat frozen, their eyes bouncing between Darnell and the woman on The bench. Langford looked at the agents, then at the paper, then at Darnell. And for the first time, she truly saw him, not just as another attorney arguing a case before her, but as the man who had been waiting for this moment. Mr. Hayes, Langford's voice wasn't sharp anymore, it was unsteady. Darnell picked up his briefcase and stepped forward, locking eyes with her. "I told you," he said, calm, unwavering, "I follow the law, even when the law fails people like me." The lead agent moved to the bench. "Judge, we need you to stand." She didn't move. Then, finally, she did. And when the agents snapped the cuffs around her wrists, the courtroom wasn't just watching, they were witnessing a reckoning. But this wasn't over yet. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the courtroom, sharp and final. For 24 years, Judge Meredith Langford had ruled this room with an iron grip. Attorneys feared her. Defendants knew they didn't stand a chance. The system had protected her for decades, turning a blind eye to her rulings, her bias, the thinly veiled contempt she held for people like Darnell Hayes. But now, she stood in the very spot where she had condemned countless men before, wrists bound, eyes frantic, power slipping. The courtroom was electric, a rare, once-in-a-lifetime kind of moment that no one had expected to see. The jury, the gallery, even Philip Calloway, the young prosecutor who had been so eager to please her, stared in stunned silence. Darnell let the moment stretch. He had spent years building toward this, gathering every piece of evidence, tracking every bribe, every unethical ruling, every case she had manipulated. He had been patient, playing the long game, knowing that one day the weight of her corruption would become too heavy to ignore. And today was that day. One of the federal agents pulled a folded sheet of paper from his jacket and began reading the charges aloud. "Meredith Langford, you are under arrest for multiple violations of the Civil Rights Act, bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial power. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Langford finally found her voice. "This is outrageous," she hissed. The lead agent didn't even blink. "You can take that up with your lawyer." A wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. The reporter scrambled to capture every detail, the way Langford's hands shook, the way her once imposing presence seemed so small now. She turned to Darnell. "You," she spat, her voice laced with something between rage and disbelief, "this is your doing." Darnell lifted his chin slightly. "This is justice," he corrected. For the first time in his career, the balance had shifted. Langford tried to compose herself, but it was useless. The power she had wielded for so long was gone. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. For years, she had sat in judgment, handing out hollow lectures about accountability and respect for the law. And now, she stood before the very system she had abused. The agents moved her toward the doors, but not before one final humiliation. A court officer, someone who had worked under her for years, who had once bowed to her authority without question, held the door open for her, like a routine step taken by any other defendant. Langford hesitated for only a brief moment before making her way through the heavy courtroom doors. With a swift motion, they slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate. In an instant, she was gone, vanished from the place where she had held so much power and influence for so long. The courtroom fell into an eerie silence, the kind that clings to the air, thick with the weight of what had just unfolded. It wasn't just the abruptness of her departure, but the magnitude of it that left everyone breathless. Each individual in the room seemed frozen in place, as though trying to process what they had just witnessed, the reality of it settling like a heavy fog over the entire space. Darnell exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that seemed to expel all the tension he'd been holding for so long. His hands, which had been tense at his sides, now rested heavily on the defense table, a faint tremor in his fingers. The fight had been long, and the weight of the moment felt both relieving and surreal. His client, Tyrone Wills, turned to him, his face a mixture of disbelief and awe, as if he were unsure whether he was witnessing a scene from reality or a courtroom drama that could only happen on screen. "Man," Tyrone muttered in a low, stunned voice, shaking his head as if trying to rid himself of the impossible image of Langford's departure, "I thought people like her, they never paid for what they did." Darnell gave him a sideways glance, his gaze flickering briefly to the now vacant judge's bench. It had once been occupied by a woman whose presence had dominated the room, but now it felt like a hollow reminder of the betrayal that had taken place. He allowed a quiet pause to stretch between them before answering, his voice steady yet tinged with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. "They do," he replied, his tone calm but resolute, "but the real lesson is still to come." The silence in the courtroom was tangible, but it didn't last long. The gallery, still grappling with the shock of what had just transpired, began to hum with hushed conversations. Whispers filtered through the air, some of disbelief, some of awe, others edged with barely contained satisfaction, the kind of satisfaction only witnessed in those rare moments when the scales of justice tipped unexpectedly in favor of what was right. The jury members exchanged glances, their eyes wide, as if trying to confirm that they had all seen the same thing. The weight of that realization hung heavily between them, binding them in shared understanding. Darnell remained unmoving, his posture unwavering as he processed the scene unfolding around him. He had fought many battles in this courtroom, each one leaving its mark, but this felt different. It wasn't just a victory, it was something more profound, something years in the making. He had played the long game, tirelessly working behind the scenes to expose the corruption that ran so deeply through Langford's veins. He had known for so long that her actions were too brazen, too reckless, to stay hidden forever. Every piece of evidence he had gathered, every strategy he had planned, every moment of patience had led to this single, pivotal instant. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived. But even in the face of that hard-won moment, there was a bittersweet edge to it. Tyrone Wills, despite the victory that had just been achieved, was still sitting there in handcuffs, a stark reminder that the battle was far from over. The trial against him, the one Langford had manipulated and stacked against him, was still unfinished, still hanging in the balance. Judge Langford was gone, but the echoes of her influence remained, and the path to true justice had yet to be fully realized. Darnell slowly turned, his eyes locking onto Philip Calloway, the young prosecutor who had once appeared so self-assured, so brimming with confidence, standing tall under the protective wing of Judge Langford. That image, however, was now shattered. Calloway, pale and visibly shaken, no longer carried the same air of certainty. His hands gripped the edges of his notes with the desperation of a drowning man clinging to a life raft. The security he once relied on, the assurance of Langford's support, had evaporated, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He had just lost his safety net, and with it, his sense of control. Darnell cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tension that filled the courtroom. His voice was firm as he addressed the new judge, who had been hurriedly brought in from another courtroom to take over the proceedings. "Your Honor," he began, his gaze never leaving the bench, "given the recent developments, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." The new judge, an older black man whose graying hair and calm demeanor spoke of decades of experience, paused before responding. Known for his unwavering commitment to fairness and his reputation for keeping the scales of justice balanced, the judge folded his hands together in front of him, his eyes steady as he regarded Darnell. "On what grounds, Mr. Hayes?" he asked, his voice low but commanding. Darnell turned toward the jury, allowing his words to sink in before delivering his case. His tone was deliberate, each syllable laced with conviction. "On the grounds that this entire trial was compromised from the very beginning. Judge Langford's arrest today only confirms what we've known all along, she was never impartial, and neither were her rulings. This case, Your Honor, was tainted from the start. Evidence was ignored, key witnesses were dismissed, and my client was never afforded a fair trial. This entire process was manipulated from the top down. He let the weight of his words hang in the air for a moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to settle over the courtroom. Then, with a purposeful turn back toward the judge, Darnell pressed his point home. Now that the woman who orchestrated this miscarriage of justice is in handcuffs herself, the only appropriate action left is to right the wrong she has done. We must undo the damage she caused. The new judge sat back in his chair, his hands still folded in front of him, eyes narrowing slightly as he regarded Darnell. The moment stretched, but it was clear the judge was weighing the request carefully. After what felt like an eternity, he gave a small, deliberate nod. His voice, when it came, was calm, but there was no mistaking the decisiveness in it. I agree. A profound silence settled over the room, as if the entire courtroom collectively held its breath, waiting for the final word. The judge's voice broke through the stillness with the authority that only someone of his stature could command. The charges against Tyrone Wills are hereby dismissed. Bailiff, remove his restraints. For a heartbeat, no one in the room moved. It was as though time itself had slowed. Then, with a soft click, the courtroom officer approached Tyrone and unlocked the handcuffs. The sound echoed, a sharp contrast to the stillness that had gripped the room. For the first time in years, Tyrone's hands were free again, no longer bound by the cold metal of injustice. He exhaled deeply, a long, weighted breath, one he had been holding for what felt like an eternity. The sense of relief that washed over him was palpable, as though a great weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. In that moment, even Philip Calloway, whose world had just crumbled around him, sat motionless at his desk. His face was a portrait of defeat as he stared at the wood of the table in front of him, his expression vacant, as if he had just lost something far more significant than a mere trial, something irretrievable. The courtroom, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now seemed to hum with an almost sacred quiet as the realization of justice, finally, albeit belatedly, unfolding, washed over those present. Tyrone gently rubbed his wrists, the rawness from the handcuffs still lingering, as he turned slowly toward Darnell. His voice was barely audible, heavy with disbelief. I don't even know what to say, he murmured, the weight of everything that had just transpired settling over him like a thick fog. Darnell placed a firm hand on Tyrone's shoulder, the gesture both grounding and reassuring. His voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable strength in it. You don't need to say anything, Tyrone, not right now, because for once, the justice system actually worked. And it didn't happen by accident. It happened because someone like us, fought for you. Tyrone's gaze drifted around the courtroom, his eyes scanning the space that had at one point felt like an impenetrable fortress. The walls seemed to close in on him as he took in the magnitude of what had just unfolded, his freedom, the truth that had been uncovered, the system that had finally been forced to bend in his favor. But as his feet moved, the sense of closure was overshadowed by something deeper, something that wouldn't let him simply move on. He didn't say another word. He just walked toward the door, his steps deliberate and slow. Darnell followed quietly behind, his own thoughts pressing down on him, a heavy weight on his chest. It wasn't just about Tyrone's case. No, it was about much more than that. This victory, though significant, was only a small dent in a system built on years of corruption. Every case Judge Langford had ever ruled on flashed through Darnell's mind, the countless innocent lives she had destroyed with her biased rulings, the bribes she'd taken in secret, the unjust judgments she'd passed without a shred of remorse. All of it had led them to this moment. And it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Darnell knew that this was just the beginning. The battle for justice wasn't a one-time victory, it was a relentless, ongoing fight against the entrenched powers that would do anything to maintain the status quo. Yes, he had won today, but tomorrow he would be back at work, back in the trenches, fighting for those still silenced by the system. Because there were more Langfords out there, hidden in plain sight, ready to destroy another life with their power and corruption. Darnell wasn't done, not by a long shot. There was so much more to be done, so many more battles to fight. If you believe in true justice, in the power to hold those in power accountable for their actions, then don't just watch from the sidelines. Don't remain silent as others continue to suffer. Let your voice be heard. Like, comment, and subscribe, because together, we can make sure that the fight for justice doesn't end here. We're just getting started.